So, we're finally getting proper information about the new upcoming James Bond game, James Bond First Light, and I have to say, I'm very, very excited by this development. I am a lifelong fan of James Bond. I have been since I was a little kid. I am now at the movies, the games. I own all of the games across all of the consoles. It is a series that I just love dipping my toes into the world of, and when they announced this back in late 2020, a collaboration between IO Interactive and Eon to make this game happen, I was over the moon because Hitman is one of my favorite game series of all time. I put so many hours into that series, and the fact that the next James Bond game was basically going to be made by the team that makes the amazing Hitman games, it just made me so happy. And we haven't heard anything about this game from the end of 2020 until a bit earlier this year. Not a peep. I honestly thought the game was either cancelled or it was in development hell, but then they've started talking about it, and everything that they've shown so far is ticking the right boxes for me. It's got the right blend of that Hitman series gameplay that I love, and it's also got enough of that James Bond sort of uniqueness, that charm, the tropes and all of the experiences that you'd expect from a James Bond game to really make it stand out from the Hitman games. And today we got 30 minutes of gameplay, 30 minutes to see what this game has to offer, and I love the fact that we got to see so much of the opening of this game. And the best part, we don't have to wait long to get our hands on it. It's coming next March, which is absolutely amazing. So I'm going to spend some time here just going through some of the things that I really liked. Now, first things first, this looks gorgeous. This is only an alpha build, and of course there are some graphical issues. There's some issues with some shadows and some pop-in I noticed when you kind of get to the built-up area. And of course, with an alpha build, you would not expect it to be fully formed, but even at this point, the game just looks great. And it's really incredible to me just how much detail there is in this world. Like, for example, here when the car stops, you can see the reflections on the car. You can see at the bottom the shadows are a bit low res there, and I'm guessing that that's the kind of thing that they're going to spend the next few months just ironing out. But what I kind of like is that everything looks fluid, everything seems impressive. You can see here there's a load of NPCs as you're driving into this area. There's a van there with people loading stuff on. There's a lot of things going on. The world feels alive. It doesn't just feel like a video game stage. It actually feels like you're entering a living, breathing area. And that's something that's very important in these kind of games. If you feel like you're just wandering into an empty sandbox, it's not really that fun. And I imagine we're not going to be able to explore all of this area. I imagine that for the most part will be kept to a specific area at the top here when we get out of the car, but it's just nice that there's a lot of window dressing. It sets the stage for this mission. I also like that in this mission there's a sense of organic growth as you're kind of exploring. So Bond here should not be leaving the car, and he's being told by his co-workers not to leave the car, and yet because he's bored and because, you know, he sees something that he thinks needs investigating, that's what prompts him to go into the mission. And that affects the mission later on, because you're not supposed to be seen by any of the people that you're working with, because they will not be happy to see you. But as we come up the top here, you can see, just look at all of this. There's so much going on up here, and Bond is interacting with people. There are things going on. You can see in the distance there's plenty of opportunities for the player, and when we talk to this character here, we're actually given dialogue options on how we want to sort of interact. And I like that, because even though we've seen this kind of thing in video games many times, it does kind of add to that sort of Hitman feel of you can sort of manipulate the world, you can sort of interact with it. And you can see there's a window. I like that the game doesn't sort of play keep away with the details. It's showing you, well, you can enter in here or you can enter through the front door. I'm sure there are other ways in here as well. You can see that there's a pipe there. And again, this is the Hitman influence in full effect here. This is what IO Interactive do so well when they are given the chance to. They create these really deep worlds with multiple layers of entry, and it fits perfectly into the James Bond ethos. And much like in the Hitman games, it's about finding opportunities, it's about finding ways to bend the game's world to help you. For example, you can see that there's a hose here that can be turned on, and turning that on means that the gardener over there will come and check it out, and that means that there's one less pair of eyes to catch you in this restricted area. Now, I obviously imagine there's going to be a lot of these kind of spaces in the game, much like they are in Hitman. And again, this is why I feel that this kind of gameplay lends itself beautifully to James Bond. You're supposed to be a spy, you're supposed to be finding ways and evaluating the world that you're in. I also like how they're using the personality of James Bond to push some of these features more naturally into the game. So when Bond jumps in the window here, people actually see him come in, and what he does, he basically says, oh, this is my job, I'm here to look for vulnerabilities. And people who don't watch James Bond movies don't understand that one of the things James Bond as a character does really well is they're able to talk themselves out of situations, and it's nice to see that being directly incorporated into the game here. As I mentioned earlier on as well, one thing that I really like is that they make use of the setup from earlier on in the mission in order to kind of add tension here, because as you can see, Bond bumps into some of his colleagues, and the thing is, he doesn't want to get seen by them. If he gets seen by them, then that's the end of the mission, so Bond has to find a way to work around their presence. It adds another layer of tension into these missions. The other thing that I really appreciate, and this is because it kind of differentiates this from Hitman in a big way, is that this seems like it's going to lean more heavily into the action chops of James Bond as a series. And what I mean by that is that we're getting car chases. Now, obviously, car chases are quite difficult to do in a lot of games because a lot of games have stifled controls, and from the looks of this, it seems like that's going to be okay. Now, it's very hard to tell just from the sort of gameplay trailer here, but looking at the way that the car's moving around, it seems fine. It doesn't seem like it's going to be that frustrating. The only thing with this kind of section, in my opinion, is that once you've played it through once, it's probably not going to be that exhilarating to repeatedly play through it, because I kind of get the feeling that with car sections like this, they have a very limited shelf life. And one thing I'm kind of hoping is that they'll let you sort of replay these missions without having to do these kind of sections, because the thing is, if they nail this perfectly, then it's not a problem. But if they don't nail it, and there have been plenty of James Bond games where the car sections have been not so great, then you'll obviously want to skip right over that. But again, they've expanded the scope of the sort of Hitman gameplay style here to incorporate a much larger world, and what it kind of seems like is that the missions kind of bleed into each other. So obviously the first part we were infiltrating that sort of castle, sort of manor location, and then the second part it leads to this part here. I'm going to be very interested to see if this is forced. I imagine it is. I imagine there's not going to be much scope for sort of avoiding this, because like I imagine that when you're finding your targets and they escape, they're always going to kind of run to the car and sort of start driving off, because the game needs you to get to a certain point, and it's a bit unrealistic to expect that kind of openness. But I will be interested to see how they kind of address that within the games, because obviously allowing the player to choose how they get to the target is one thing, but then if the target kind of does the same things each time, it might feel a bit hollow. I don't know, like we'll see how that plays out, if you get what I mean. I also like the cutscenes that they're kind of showing off here. I feel that the cutscenes in James Bond are going to be very, very important, because James Bond, first and foremost, is a very narrative-driven series, and I feel that this game is going to have to kind of express a story that is interesting and keeps the player hooked, because obviously you can't really have a James Bond game if the story is going to be pretty naff. And unfortunately, again, we've had some James Bond games over the years that failed quite spectacularly in that regard. I do like the female secret agent there that he bumps into, and again, it seems like that they're blending all the missions into sort of one big blur. So this is kind of like a huge sort of open world space, and one thing that I noticed with the start of this sort of mission here is that it's giving you prompts for the plane over there, but I do wonder if there's a way to sort of finesse your way through this mission. I don't think so, because the second you drop into this pipe, It's kind of like the game goes, well, here you go. Interesting to note as well, it seems that you're not allowed to use your weapons unless the game tells you. So when it says that license to kill that you saw back in the pipe there, that seems to be the game's prompt of going, okay, now you can use your weapons. Because up to sort of that point, I didn't see any option to sort of pull out your guns, and I think again that's another change from James Bond. I know that in the past Eon have had a lot of problems with Bond shooting like other people, being very action heavy, and maybe that's sort of one of the mandates that they had with IO Interactive, because remember, this has been in development since at least the mid 2020 period, and the thing with that is that Eon hadn't been sold to Amazon by that point. And one of the things with the old Eon hierarchy is they did not like Bond shooting guns in video games. They apparently got very, very touchy about that. So the fact that we're getting so much action in this game, it kind of makes me suspect that that license to kill is the way that they're doing that, to sort of get around that old mandate. Love the graphics here, love the explosions, bit of slowdown there as things sort of blew up. We got to get onto this plane, very tense filled. The music here is pretty great, although I'm not going to, like, you can't listen to it unfortunately because it'll probably get stung by the copyright gods. Love that Bond can throw his guns at the enemies here. The melee combat seems very sort of Uncharted-like, if that's a fair thing to say. If you've ever played the Uncharted games, you'll probably know what that kind of feels like. It does kind of feel a little bit like the newer Hitman games as well. It looks very influenced by that. You have to understand as well, the Hitman games do not have this kind of action going on. So it is going to be very interesting to see how these are to play, because it kind of feels like Bond's a bit overpowered here. It kind of feels a bit like the action being dialed up to 11. Very interesting, very fun, but it also kind of is a very big contrast to what we were doing like just 10 minutes ago. And I'm going to be interested to see how they handle this sort of transition in the game, because if the stealth sections, when you're sort of infiltrating the wide open areas, are fun, and then these action areas become a bit more sort of blah, that might be a problem. I don't know. I'm not put off by these action sections, but like I said, it's very clear that they are leaning heavier into the sort of action set piece motifs than they would with the Hitman series. And I keep bringing up Hitman because that is probably the closest gaming experience we can have to what this game is going to be like, because obviously made by the same developers. I do like this set piece here where we sort of get onto the plane. It is actually pretty fun, and I have to say, like, Bond kind of has that, you know, like plot armor feel here. Like, bullets are flying, things are flying everywhere. Love the graphic style though. There's a lot of detail in the set, but the body count is also very high. So it's one of those situations where like this is a very set piece heavy part of the game. It feels like an action movie. It feels like we've gone from sort of a infiltration like spy thriller to sort of more action, and I like I said, it's going to be interesting to see how they handle that throughout the whole game. I do like though that this world feels like it's alive, and it feels like you get to play an active part in how that sort of sets up. The only main worry I have, the big thing that's probably making me go, okay, I really want to see more of this game just to see how it plays, is how deep are your interactions going to be, because obviously they're trying to tell a story here and there's not much scope for sort of leaving that sort of story. I can imagine there's going to be a lot of sort of different ways to approach these missions, but I want to see how that actually impacts the sort of game. I like here as well that it's just sort of showing you that there are multiple ways to approach these areas, and you can interact with the enemies, you can sort of suave them, you can sort of give them that James Bond charm. I do like that. I think that it's very important that they kind of captured that. I'm very excited for James Bond 007 First Light. I'm very, very keen to see what IO Interactive can do with this. I hope that this is just the first step in like what they're going to be doing. What I've seen so far, it's very impressive, visually beautiful. It looks like what I thought it was going to be, which is a cross of Hitman and a kind of more sort of action-y game, a bit like Uncharted. I want to say Uncharted, but I feel like some people may misinterpret me saying that. but I just get that vibe from this. It looks and feels like that kind of game, and that's not a bad thing. It's just going to be interesting to see how they kind of mesh the stealth parts with the more action mandated sections. But it's clear that there's a lot of attention and detail that's gone into this, and I am going to be curious to see how much they kind of rip from the Hitman replayability, because one of the things with the Hitman levels is that you can have endless fun just messing around in those little sort of levels, and it looks like a lot of these levels are going to kind of mix and match between being huge and then being kind of on rail and not as open. But again, it's just one of those things that I'm just excited. Like, it's the first time in over a decade we've had a proper James Bond game arriving, and this looks like it's going to try something very, very interesting with the video game series, which I'm all for. I think that James Bond should be a AAA game franchise, and hopefully this is the game that's going to put it back in that spot. Very excited, very interested to see where this goes. Let me know in the comments what you think. Are you excited for this? Are you going to be buying this day one? Let me know, and thank you so much for watching.